Welcome back to McKinley. Oh my goodness, it's been 12 months since we've been able to share anything with you. That's not to say things haven't been motoring along. Parts have been unexpected, some have been great, and I'm going to give you a quick update. Just to refresh your memories about what McKinley Railway is, it's a very large DCC, Digitrax controlled layout. It's got 8 operating areas on it. This is one of them here, Sheffield. And there are other equivalent ones like this in London, Manchester. They're all manually controlled by operators, and they build trains up to timetables to depart to other operating areas on the railway. The trains are driven by an application called Train Controller Gold between stations. So within the stations, operators run the railways, and between the stations on the main lines, the computer drives the trains. As you can see, Sheffield here, we've now completed. When you last saw, or my last video we presented it on, we were busy trying to put the boards down and join all the wires to the right components. Well, Sheffield itself is physically complete. It's all been electrically tested. We're running trains on it. All the points work, all the feedback works. Everything's connected. We ended up re-engineering the engine shed tracks. James Norris did a great job on that and did some great point work there. The 2 great big main fiddle yards on the east and west ends haven't changed substantially. They've gone down as we planned. We'd already finished the level D island piece over here, and we had already completed the 3 storage levels, which we call Hades, underneath. The thing that we had to do differently, and Ian came up with this idea, was to allow us to run trains on this layout without having to connect it through to the other room. And so he came up with an inventive idea of an American term called a shoe fly, where the 2 tracks that were going to go through the wall, we effectively put a great big hoop in to allow trains to run on this railway in here. The crucial aspect of that is we can do all the testing of all the storage yards, of the time machine, of the freight management on this layout without having to complete the other layout as well. So in effect we've got 2 railways controlled by 1 database and 1 train controller. The other part, or the second part, that's gone on leaps and bounds during lockdown is the database system. So when we were last doing presentations about McKinley, the database consisted of things like the timetable generator. It would have station management screens that allowed you to build a train up to send to Manchester from London. And it was a database of stock and timetables. We wanted to extend it much further. We wanted it to manage freight within stations. We also, well, I specifically wanted to use it to track how the railway was doing. And Steve Winter, who's now gone back to New Zealand, but he's still working on our railway remotely, he integrated the database with Loconet. And you might think, well, what's the benefit of that? Huge benefits. I'm going to cover the detail of that in 2 subsequent videos, but just to give you a taster, it allows me to see when we bring up the railway, I can see at a glance within 2 minutes that every sensor, every switch that should have reported its position has done so. I then know where to go to find out if it isn't doing it. So that's one huge benefit. And the other thing is the database system is effectively now in a position where it has a real-time view of the railway. So it's no longer in the preserve of an application called Train Controller. Our database system knows where everything is and allows us to do incredible things, or it will allow us to do that, such as freight management. But as I said, I'm going to go into more detail on those 2 things in the next video. But he made huge leaps because, of course, he could carry on programming. So he's built code 9-10 months ago that we still haven't tested yet. There's a challenge. Another area which was a great success was to do with the uncoupling. You will have seen in previous videos how we put these uncoupling techniques into the back ends of shunters, and that was a really clever little tool that somebody who watched the YouTube channel came back to us on. The bit that was bugging me was to do with the electromagnetic uncouplers that we were using in the other stations. It was still quite a human faff to be able to press a button at the same time as also driving an engine, then pressing another button. It required an awful lot of dexterity. And I was talking through this on a Zoom call with one chap called Ian Hart, and he said, well, we could develop a clever system. And so he's prototyped and then built, and we've now installed in Sheffield, about 18 of these uncouplers that allow us to just press a button. It energizes the uncoupler and allows you to then drive the engine with your throttle without thinking about trying to hold the electromagnetic uncoupler on. We've made other significant advances around the way engines are controlled at that point, and we're going to do a specific video on the uncoupling sequence, and effectively it's uncoupler version 2 for McKinley, but I'm really happy with what's come out of that. Another area which we started work on before lockdown was to do with the upgrading of the control panels. We started looking at one of the existing ones on the old layout for Manchester. And one of the visitors who came said he found it very confusing. It was visually very compressed. We spent an inordinate amount of time during lockdown. We went through all kinds of iterative designs, inspired by something I saw at a show up in the Midlands. And we've built our prototype version 2 station panel here for Sheffield. It's got a lot of detailed features on it. A lot of it, the technology, or rather the architecture, is the same as the existing panels in terms of if you press the interlocks, if you press the platform release buttons, the points are controlled by the similar switches. But effectively, the way that the panel has been made, that was a journey, and it's beautiful. We've thought about the colours for colourblind people. We've spent an inordinate amount of time. We couldn't believe how many people had colour sight issues with different reds and different greens. They could see that orange, they couldn't see that yellow. We spaced it out so you have the points. We've added if there are short circuits on the layout, so that if something is short circuiting, it's immediately apparent on the panel. We've added routes to these stations. We've also added occupancy indicators to indicate in specific areas where necessary if the track is empty or not. Typically we never did that before, but because of the way it's been laid out for Sheffield, it gave us the space, and I'm really pleased with how it looks. The funny thing is Ivana doesn't like the panel surround. She says it makes it look quite dated, and so we've set her with a task to go and find out, and I kind of agree. Maybe we should maybe a different colour, but there you go, everyone's got different ideas in this team. So here's the panel, here's all the detail of it, and it looks quite spectacular. And there's going to be a specific video that Ivana and I and Ian are going to take you through, explaining the journey of how we got to build that panel. Another piece of the puzzle for McKinley that made huge strides during lockdown was the extension. Right now all you can see is these faint ghosts of a layout support framework. There's one here, they go all the way over there. So during lockdown, we were faced with this problem that we hadn't thought about the extension design, the detailed design, what the track worked. We had a rough idea from Steve Davis of something, but we hadn't put it through the testing mill. And so we started a collaborative process using Zoom, and it was amazing how well that worked. It was much more slower, that's not very good English, is it? But we went through the process of checking everything out. We drew the track work out, and once we had visually checked it and many eyes met every Monday for 3 or 4 months, going through the designs for each of the stations, working out what the operational workflow was about. We then, when actually things got easier last summer, we actually got some styrofoam in, we built the layout as a quickie, like we did for Sheffield on the paper. We tested it. We had enough of a window to get some teams in to run wagons and shove things backwards and forwards, and it works. And so when the second lockdown, or this last lockdown, just before it arrived, we took all the styrofoam boards out and we shipped them off to James to go and build in his workshop. Now that was a radical change for us because we had intended to build our railway on top of it here. But the time that's taken with everything else and the fact that we're behind schedule, it was actually a great short circuit to the process, because he's building that railway away from here. None of the dirt and dust involved. It's a better design because we spent an awful lot more time putting all the components in that we didn't think about when we built Sheffield. And as I showed you last time, with all the jigging, the cutting and the lobbing and this and that we had to do, it's a much better thought out layout from both a buildability and an operating level. And that's being built. We're going to produce 3 videos on that just show that journey in more detail and what we did behind it. And I'm looking forward to that coming back relatively soon, almost in Lego form, like a hygienic kitchen. It's just going to appear one day. We're going to plug it in and off we go. Another area which we did, which I didn't anticipate doing, but here's what happened. This is a real lockdown journey. When the first lockdown occurred, I was trying to find stuff that the guys could take away to do at home. And we found that all our Class 20 locos didn't have lights in. We wanted to put them in. And I found a chap called Jason Edmonds, and he goes by an unusual eBay name, which I've got written down on the floor here, Stick Swipe. And we bought some of his loco lighting kits for Pete to fit at home. And Ian was playing with them, and then eventually a box would come back to my house, all sort of distance, we leave it for the weekend. And I was looking at these things, and I suddenly found that these locomotives, the tail lights were separately controllable from the headlights, i.e. you could have the headlights on, you could have the tail lights at one or both ends on, and you could do this and that. And Ian said, well, that'd be much more prototypical if we did it for McKinley. So, oh my goodness, a journey and a half. We then went through the process of basically hacking into about 40 different kinds of engine types, the Bachmann 47s, the single switch, the double switch versions, you know, the 2 switches on the bottom. We did everything. And we've now got a fleet of diesel locomotives where all the tail lights are controllable. It's been a bit of a distraction, but we've enjoyed doing it. It wasn't part of the plan, but it was something which the guys could do at home when we had the severe periods of lockdown. And we're going to do a detailed video showing you the how-tos of that a bit later on. Another factor which hit us in lockdown was how to keep the team together. As I mentioned, we started to do the Zoom sessions for design, but I wanted to find some way to keep the operating teams together. So we started doing Zooms on Thursday nights, and that proved to be a great success. People would share things with the rest of the group, that, you know, what they were doing and the kind of things. And if we were doing stuff here, we could share that out. And one of the things that occurred to me is I had a reasonable history of the introduction of diesels for the time machine, but I'd never thought about the impact of the decline of steam. I hadn't ever studied it. So I started to research that area, and I ended up doing a series of 4 PowerPoint presentations, which were effectively capturing those periods of time from the rationalization of steam in the mid to late 50s, the diesel dawn, then this mad dash for new diesels without any kind of prototypes, and just the destruction of steam engines by the hundreds, and then the rationalization of diesels. And everyone said, well, we've done so much work there, why don't we share that with you guys? So I'm going to be sharing 4 presentations on YouTube in the next few months anyway, that just capture the data that we had to research in order to get McKinley into its right state. So overall, it's been a really interesting time. Parts of the railway have shot forward, parts of it have been completely delayed, things are out of tilt and out of kilt. But somehow we found ways to progress it. Inventive ideas, short circuits, outsourcing stuff to James to get the bits built allows us to capture 6 months here. So it's been a journey, but I think we survived it quite well. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I look forward to keeping you updated very soon.